Hey guys, I have a fascination with all things mysterious, creepy, weird. I love going deep into topics that I often just stumble upon surely by accident, and I love telling stories. So, welcome to Sit and Spin. I'll be telling you a story while I spin using different styles or techniques, and you can join in or just watch and listen while we go exploring history, conspiracy, the paranormal, anything that I find interesting or fascinating. These are stories of the internet, though, so I can't vouch for the validity. They're just fun to talk about. Today, I'm going to be working with a lovely Rambouillet braid that I got from Wool Interrupted. You can see the unboxing video will be posted as well. So this is 5 ounces. We're going to do a fractal spin on this. So we're going to split the yarn in half lengthwise. Don't mind the noise. That's my kitty cats playing. If you're lucky, they might do a little cameo. So we're going to split the fiber in 2 lengthwise. We're going to spin 1/2 from the end. The other side we're going to split into smaller strips, and we're going to spin those all end to end, and then we're going to apply the 2 together. Now, we're obviously not going to get through all of it today, but as I'm telling you a story, I'll be working on this. I'll put a list of any tools I use in the description box below in case you're interested. And otherwise, let's spin a yarn. So this week, we're going to go with a classic haunted house story. The Congelier Mansion. Let's go with Congelier. I never did look it up to see how it's pronounced. It's probably French, so it's probably Congelier, but I'm not French, despite being Canadian. So the Congelier Mansion was located at 1129 Ridge Avenue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Affectionately, it was known as the house the devil built. That's affectionate. It's America's most haunted house. It has a long history of mysterious events and hauntings, and we're going to explore the entire history from the start. So, legend has it, the house at 1129 Ridge Avenue was built in the 1860s by Charles Congelier. Congelier. I still can't say it. Congelier? Charles. We'll call him Charles. Who lived there with his wife Lydia and their maid Essie. Wow, I got this all tangled up. Hold on a second. We're going to untangle our roving before we continue with our story. Just so that you know things don't ever go smooth for everybody all the time. There we go. This is real life, folks. It happens. All right. We're back to splitting. All right. Where were we? Oh, yes. Charles, Lydia, and Essie the maid. So Charles had made his fortune in the Civil War, and he decided to settle his family in the booming industry town of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So he built this huge ornate mansion, the Congelier house. I still can't say that. Anyways, they had like the best parties. They were known for having like really ornate, fancy parties, and all the big business magnates of Pittsburgh would come to these parties at Charles' house and his wife, Lyda. Did I call her Lydia earlier? Her name is Lyda. Apparently she's Spanish, Mexican. I don't know. It's a different name though, Lyda. I kind of like it. So they settled in, they're living their successful life, you know, the dream, living the dream, the American success story. Come from nothing, have this big, beautiful mansion, hosting all these fancy parties. Life is great. Until 1871. And in 1871, Lida caught Charles and the maid Essie in the act. And I think you know what act I mean. They were getting to know each other in the biblical sense. So it's unclear whether Essie was a willing participant because, of course, as a maid, she had no social standing, probably wasn't really able to say no to Charles. Okay, this is really springy, so I'm going to up my twist a bit and adjust my brake. Let's see how it goes now. Oh, it didn't stick, so we're going to have to rethread our wheel and try again. All right, so Essie and Charles getting it on. Let's get it on. Lida catches them in the act. Now, she wasn't having this. This was her husband. It didn't matter if Essie was innocent, if she was forced by Charles or intimidated into a relationship with her. That didn't matter to Lida. The fact remained, Essie was involved with Charles. So Lida goes down to the kitchen and she grabs some knives. She ambushes her husband Charles and the maid Essie, and she kills them both. Nobody knew about it for several days, and a neighbor came in and found Lida sitting in a rocking chair in her parlor, crooning lullabies to Essie's severed head. That's disgusting. Just cuddling the head, rocking back and forth, and crooning lullabies to the dead maid's head. I don't know if in her crazy mind she decided it was her baby or what, but that's apparently what she was doing. So this is a great start to the history of this mansion. Like, that alone could cause a haunting, but that's not everything that happened there. It goes on. Obviously, nobody wanted this place. Like, first of all, it's freaking huge. It's a mansion. Who wants to buy that? Second of all, people had really gross bloody deaths in this house. Like a beheading death, like a cuddle the severed head death. It's gross. Eventually, in 1892, so 1871 was when the murder happened. So in 1892, the railroad bought the mansion. So they intended to use the huge building as apartments for their workers. So they could have all their men staying in one place and their crew could go together. And it was just a convenience that they could offer to their workers. But no one would stay there for very long. They claimed to hear screams, a sobbing woman, the ominous creaking groans of a rocking chair, and a woman mumbling out old lullabies. So basically, they thought Lida was haunting the house and still singing her songs to Essie's head. Within 2 years, the house was abandoned again. Next, we have Dr. Adolf C. Brunrichter. Yeah, my German accent is even worse than my French. Dr. Adolf C. Brunrichter. So he purchased the house in 1901. So Charles and Essie were killed in 1871. The railroad bought it in 1892. Now Brunrichter has it in 1901. So he was something of an enigma around the neighborhood. He had very little to do with his neighbors, kept to himself, and was rarely seen even by those who lived close by. So, like, I have to confess, this could be a description of me. I bought my house. I kind of stick to myself. I live inside with my cats. Yes, I'm the crazy cat lady of my neighborhood. And I wonder, do my neighbors think I'm a serial killer? So on the night of August 12th, 1901, the next door neighbor heard a terrified scream coming from Brunrichter's house. They rushed outside and they saw this like bright red flash from inside the house, and it blew out the windows and it sent shattered glass flying everywhere. Like, this explosion was so big, the earth trembled and sidewalks cracked and furniture in nearby homes was disturbed. Of course, they called, police and fire department. Get over here, there's been an explosion. Hurry up, hurry up. But no one was brave enough to go into the house, and no one had seen the doctor come out of the house. When the fire department arrived, of course, it's their job, so they went in to see what was going on and hopefully rescue Dr. Brunrichter. But they didn't find him. Instead, they found a horror story. Upstairs, spread-eagled on a blood-soaked bed, was the decomposed, naked body of a young woman. Just her body. The head was gone. They did find the head and a host of other atrocities in the basement. Like some modern-day Frankenstein, Brunrichter had a laboratory set up where he was experimenting with severed heads. He was trying to keep them alive after decapitation using electrical equipment. So he had like this whole lab with like these heads just sitting there hooked up to electrical current. Hopefully they didn't blink at the firemen, but you never know. So this equipment was apparently what had caused the explosion, which led to the gruesome discovery. They also found bodies of 5 other women buried in the cellar. So those belonged to the heads that were in the lab. Brunrichter was never found. He made good his escape after the explosion, and until September 1927, so like 25, 26 years later, suddenly he turns up again. An old man was arrested in New York. He was living among the homeless and the street people, and he was booked for public drunkenness. So the name he gave was, you guessed it, Adolf Brunrichter. He wasn't shy about his past. In fact, he was quite proud of it. He told the police hideous tales of how he was once an eminent doctor working to prolong life, but unfortunately he could only succeed with his experiments by, killing people. He told them how he bought this mansion in Pittsburgh and how he enticed women with, promises of romance, only to behead them and use their severed heads in experiments. He also told of the location of graves other than the ones that were found in the basement of 1129 Ridge Avenue. The authorities didn't know of these graves, but when they went and looked, they didn't actually find any. So Brunrichter was locked up in Blackwell's Island for a whole month. But the mad doctor was deemed harmless and released. He was never charged with any murders, and he was never seen or heard from again. But before he left, on the wall of his cell, he scrawled in his own blood, "What Satan hath wrought, let man beware." Doesn't exactly sound harmless to me. When was H.H. Holmes active? Maybe Dr. Brunrichter changed his name again and went and built a murder mansion. He did like mansions. Well, once again, the house that had seen so much bloodshed and a great deal of severed heads. Like, seriously. There was Essie's severed head, and now this doctor has added a whole bunch of more severed heads to this house. It's like, it should be called the severed head house instead of, the haunted house. But it sat empty for a while. Now it's starting to gain a real reputation. So a spiritual medium named Julia Murray went to do a walkthrough of this mansion. And she said that the entity would kill one day. Whatever entity is living in this house is going to kill one day. Witnesses say that while she was there, some unseen spirit hurled objects at her and they barely missed striking her. So obviously Julia Murray was not very popular with the ghosts. But she was popular with a man called Thomas Edison. You might have heard of him. Crazy inventor dude, made all sorts of modern conveniences possible. Yeah, well, he was also interested in spiritualism, as so many were at the time. Apparently, he visited the property, and after this visit, he announced he was working on building a machine that would allow him to communicate with the other side. Nobody knows what possibly happened at the house to make him want to do this, but it seemed to drive him to believe there was another side to communicate with. Despite their fearsome reputation for being haunted, the Equitable Gas Company decided to purchase the mansion and convert it into apartments for their workers. Somebody else tried this at one point. Didn't work out so great for them either. Now, here's the thing. The Equitable Gas Company ended up hiring a bunch of Italian workers who would work at a lower wage, and they replaced the unionized, I assume they'd be unionized by that point, maybe not, but they replaced the American workers who wanted a higher wage and better working conditions, etc., etc. So the Equitable Gas Company hired these Italian workers, and they housed a bunch of them at this new mansion they bought, despite its haunted history. Nice of them to plop them in there. I bet they got that for a song. When the Italian workers complained of strange occurrences, management just told them they were being punked by the laid off American workers, and the Italians were like, yeah, makes sense. And they let it go. Until there was a very weird pair of deaths in the house. Two brothers were amongst the crew. One brother took the dishes to the kitchen after supper, to get cleanup started. And when he didn't show up within a certain amount of time, his brother went looking for him. And he goes into the kitchen and it's like his brother's not there. So he sees the basement doors open. So he goes and he looks down into the basement. And as he's going down the basement steps, everybody else hears this hideous scream and they all come running. One brother, the first who had gone to the kitchen, is hung by the rafters dead. The other brother is on the floor, impaled through the chest with a wooden board. And he also is dead. So, of course, they call the cops. They're like, this is insane. What is going on? So they call the cops. The cops show up. They do an investigation. Amazingly, they say that these deaths were just an unfortunate accident. That the first man who went down slipped on a broken step and was hung in the wiring suspended from the rafters. And when the second man went down to see what was delaying the first man, he too slipped on the broken step and it pierced his chest. I don't buy it. It doesn't sound like an accident. It's ridiculous. And apparently the Italian immigrants thought so too, because they moved out and they refused to ever go back. Now let's look at some history in Pittsburgh itself. So this natural gas company, the Equitable Gas Company, they had a yard they were building, a natural gas plant, a few blocks over from the mansion where they were housing their Italian immigrant workers. So they're building all these tanks and holding facilities for natural gas. Well, on November 14th, 1927, there was a huge explosion at the plant, and it decimated the neighborhood. It killed 28 and injured more than 600. Buildings in the immediate vicinity were literally leveled. And water mains broke, so fires broke out, and they couldn't put out the fires because they had no water. And the carnage just went on and on and on. It is one of the worst disasters in history, and you can read all about it if you look online. There's probably even pictures and stuff of everything that happened. This is relevant to our story because the worst damage was caused at 1129 Ridge Avenue. While the neighboring houses did sustain some minor damage, where the Congelier Mansion had stood was nothing but a smoking crater. There wasn't even rubble or debris left behind, just a hole nearly 85 feet deep that marked where the house the devil built had once stood. Today, the location is the site of the Route 65 and Interstate 279 interchange. All the spirits and the curse are gone. Or are they? Maybe they're still there, haunting hapless travelers. So this is a great legend, and it's like steeped in death and violence and grossness. And, you know, it's one you would tell around the campfire of the cursed house at, 1129 Ridge Avenue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Especially if you live there. I mean, it would be a terrific campfire story. But here's the truth. There were no Congeliers listed in any 1871 public records, which is when they were supposed to, Lida and Charles were supposed to have lived there. Nope. There was a house at 1129 Ridge Avenue, but it wasn't built until the late 1880s. So 10 years after they supposedly lived there. And it was a standard row house, so one that was commonly owned by the working class of the day. Certainly not a mansion by anybody's standards. Now, truthfully, the house was owned by a Congelier family, but not until much, much later in history. There was no Dr. Adolf Brunrichter. Never existed in any record, and certainly never owned the house at 1129 Ridge Avenue. There are also no newspaper accounts of a horrific murder or a headless corpse at 1129 Ridge Avenue. First of all, the newspapers would have been all over that. They would have been reporting every little detail of the double murder and the headless corpse. Second, I have to ask, was there a horrific murder and a headless corpse at some other address? Because the debunkers say, specifically, there are no newspaper accounts of a horrific murder or a headless corpse at 1129 Ridge Avenue. To me, this says there was one somewhere else, which is kind of creepy. There's no historical evidence of a psychic named Julia Murray. And certainly, if Edison had visited the home, he would have found a certain Congelier family living there, not an empty, haunted house. And the family would have remembered such an event. Certainly would have reported on it to other family members, if not actually called the newspaper and went, Thomas Edison came to our house for dinner looking for ghosts. Woohoo! Like that would have been big news as well. Again, due to ownership of the house by the Congelier family, there were no Italian immigrants staying there. No weird accidental deaths involving stairs and hanging and piercing, and none of that happened. Now, when the gas facility exploded, there was a death. So on November 14th, that explosion blew out the windows of the house at 1129 Ridge Avenue. The house itself wasn't damaged, but unfortunately a shard of glass that was blown out by the explosion hit a woman named Marie Congelier, who was injured. And unfortunately, the glass cut an artery in her leg, and she bled to death on the way to the hospital. But this is literally the only bloody death ever connected with the property. How all the stories of this fictional place started, how a townhouse became a mansion, who concocted the story of a beheaded maid, all this craziness. Who started it is unknown. And while it's a great story, America's first most haunted house, the house the devil built. It is just a story. So I hope you enjoyed a great yarn. Join me next time for some more Sit and Spin. Bye-bye.